Picture a young woman, barely 17 years old, dressed in layers of silk embroidered with gold thread, her hair adorned with jewels worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. She sits in a palace chamber as servants prepare her for the night ahead. Outside, the celebrations have lasted for days. Musicians have played, feasts have been consumed, gifts have been exchanged between families. But now, as darkness falls over Istanbul, the festivities quiet. The moment approaches. Despite being one of the most powerful women in one of history's greatest empires, despite outranking nearly every man in the realm, including the one waiting for her, despite having rights no European princess could dream of, her hands tremble. This is an Ottoman imperial princess on her wedding night, and she is afraid. The fear Ottoman princesses felt before their wedding night stands as one of history's most fascinating contradictions. These women held extraordinary power. They commanded vast wealth. They influenced sultans and shaped empires. Yet marriage, that universal human experience, filled them with a dread that transcended their privilege. To understand why requires us to step into a world where power and vulnerability existed in ways that seem almost impossible to reconcile. Ottoman princesses occupied a position in society that has no real equivalent in our modern world. Born as daughters of the Sultan, they carried imperial blood that placed them at the pinnacle of Ottoman society. From the moment of birth, a princess was titled Sultan, using this designation after her given name in a way that emphasized her connection to sovereign power itself. By the early 1500s, particularly after the reign of Sultan Bayezid II, this title distinguished them from all other women in the empire, marking them as members of the dynasty with all the privileges and responsibilities that entailed. Their education prepared them not just for palace life, but for genuine political influence. Unlike many royal women in other parts of the world, Ottoman princesses learned to read and write, studied religious texts, mastered court protocols, and understood the complex web of imperial politics. Many of their letters survive today in archives, revealing women who could articulate sophisticated political positions, manage vast estates, and correspond with foreign rulers. This education was not decorative. It was functional, designed to create women capable of wielding the power their birth afforded them. The wealth of an Ottoman princess defied comprehension. She received income from imperial estates specifically designated for her maintenance. She owned property outright. She commanded armies of servants and slaves. When she married, her dowry could include entire palaces, quantities of jewels that required multiple chests to contain, carpets and textiles that took years to produce, and ongoing stipends that guaranteed financial independence throughout her life. Some princesses became so wealthy they personally funded military campaigns, built mosques and public works, and operated as independent economic powers within the empire. Perhaps most remarkably, an imperial princess outranked virtually everyone except the Sultan himself, his mother, the Valide Sultan, and occasionally the highest-ranking imperial consorts. This meant she outranked her own husband. She outranked grand viziers. She outranked provincial governors and military commanders. This wasn't symbolic. It was real, enforceable power embedded in law and custom. When an Ottoman princess entered a room, men who commanded thousands of soldiers stood and bowed. This reality shaped everything about marriage for these women. Ottoman princesses did not marry for love. Marriage for them served as a tool of imperial policy, carefully calibrated to achieve specific political objectives. But unlike European princesses who were often sent to foreign courts as diplomatic offerings, Ottoman princesses married within the empire, and their marriages had a very particular purpose. From the early days of the Ottoman state until about the 1400s, sultans had married foreign princesses, forming alliances with Byzantine emperors, Serbian despots, and rulers of Anatolian principalities. These marriages carried dowries of territory and sealed peace treaties. But by the mid-15th century, particularly after the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, this practice ended. The sultans stopped marrying entirely in the traditional sense, instead taking concubines from the imperial harem who bore their children. This shift had profound implications for how the dynasty used marriage. With sultans no longer forming marriage alliances, that responsibility fell to their daughters and sisters. But the empire had also learned a hard lesson about creating rival power centers. The sultans did not want to create a new aristocracy that could challenge imperial authority. So Ottoman princesses did not marry foreign princes or even sons of powerful Ottoman families. Instead, they married men who had risen through the imperial system itself, often through the Devshirme system that recruited Christian boys, converted them to Islam, and trained them for government service. These men received the title damat upon marrying an imperial princess. The title literally meant bridegroom, but it carried enormous prestige. A damat entered the House of Osman itself through marriage. Many damats rose to become grand viziers, the highest administrative position in the empire below the sultan. The marriage of a princess to a rising official accomplished several objectives at once. It rewarded loyal service, bound talented men more tightly to the dynasty, created new lines of imperial patronage, and ensured that power remained concentrated in structures the sultan controlled. For the princess, however, this meant marrying a stranger. She might have seen her future husband from a distance at court functions. She might have heard reports about his character and capabilities. But genuine acquaintance before marriage was virtually impossible. The man chosen for her had been selected by her father or brother, often in consultation with the Valide Sultan who managed harem affairs. The princess's own preferences rarely factored into the decision. This was duty, not romance. The age at which Ottoman princesses married adds another layer to their wedding night fears. While Islamic law and later Ottoman regulations set minimum ages for marriage, the reality often saw princesses married disturbingly young. 13 was not uncommon. Some were even younger. Historical records reveal marriages that shock modern sensibilities. Hatice Sultan, daughter of Sultan Selim I, married at 13 to a man who had served her grandfather, making him decades older than his child bride. The formidable Kusem Sultan, who would later become one of history's most powerful women, married her 6-year-old daughter Ayşe Sultan to an elderly pasha. 4-year-old Gevherhan Sultan found herself wed to a man of 55 years. Ottoman law did provide some protection. A marriage could be contracted when a girl was very young, but consummation was forbidden until she reached at least 12 years of age. Even this concession, however, highlights the vulnerability these young princesses faced. A 12-year-old bride, legally permitted to consummate her marriage, remained a child in every meaningful sense. The age disparity between princess and damat created its own problems. Many of the men selected to marry princesses were seasoned officials in their 30s, 40s, or older. They had proven themselves through years of service. They had experience in war, administration, and court intrigue. The princess, by contrast, might be barely into adolescence, sheltered within the harem's protected environment, educated but inexperienced in the wider world. On her wedding night, she faced not just the unknown experience of physical intimacy, but the power imbalance of youth confronting age, innocence confronting experience. Some princesses married young and remained in unconsummated marriages for years, exercising their right to delay intimacy. But this created its own tensions. The pressure to produce children, particularly sons who would carry forward the imperial bloodline in a new generation, weighed heavily. The empire expected fertility from these marriages. Delay could only last so long before questions arose about the marriage's purpose and the princess's duties to the dynasty. Here we encounter the central contradiction that made Ottoman princesses' wedding nights so psychologically complex. In virtually every measurable way, the princess held more power than her husband. Yet she still faced the night with very real fears. An Ottoman princess did not move into her husband's household after marriage. Instead, she received her own palace or mansion, often as part of her wedding gifts. This became her domain. She established her own small harem there, not of concubines, but of servants, attendants, and female relatives who formed her household. Her husband needed permission to enter her private chambers. He could not simply arrive whenever he wished. The princess controlled access to her own space in a way that had no parallel in most other cultures of the time. This arrangement reflected the princess's superior rank. Ottoman court protocol was explicit about hierarchy. The princess, as a member of the imperial family by blood, ranked higher than her husband, who had joined the family only through marriage. At court functions, she took precedence. If both were present, she sat in a position of greater honor. Her opinions carried more weight in any matter that touched on her status or prerogatives. The damat understood that his position, his access to power, his very identity as someone connected to the imperial family, all flowed from his wife, not the other way around. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent made this hierarchy crystal clear in his treatment of his own daughter Mihrimah's marriage. He established that imperial princesses were full members of the imperial family, entitled to every respect and privilege that implied. A damat who disrespected his princess wife, who treated her as anything less than his superior, faced severe consequences. The most serious offense a damat could commit was adultery. Taking another wife or even keeping concubines constituted a humiliation to the princess and grounds for immediate divorce. Unlike in many Islamic societies where men could have multiple wives, a damat could have only one. Yet despite all this power, an Ottoman princess on her wedding night faced genuine vulnerability. She was about to experience physical intimacy with a man she barely knew. Her education, however sophisticated, had not prepared her for this. The harem was a space of women. Young princesses grew up surrounded by mothers, aunts, servants, and sisters. Their knowledge of men came largely second-hand, filtered through the cautious supervision of the Valide Sultan, who controlled harem access. The wedding night itself carried enormous significance. The empire expected the marriage to be consummated. It expected children to follow. While the princess had the right to refuse or delay intimacy, exercising that right came with its own pressures. An unconsummated marriage raised questions. It complicated the princess's ability to exercise influence through her husband. It created uncertainty about the marriage's purpose. And it left the princess in a state of limbo, neither fully maiden nor wife, neither wholly autonomous nor settled into her marital role. Before the wedding night arrived, Ottoman princesses endured weeks of increasingly elaborate ceremony that built anticipation to almost unbearable levels. Imperial weddings were not simple affairs. They were massive public spectacles designed to display the empire's wealth and power while entertaining the populace with generosity and magnificence. Preparations began months in advance. The princess's trousseau had to be assembled, a collection of possessions so extensive it required detailed inventories. Carpets that took years to weave, textiles embroidered by skilled artisans, jewels that represented fortunes, clothing for every conceivable occasion, all had to be gathered, cataloged, and prepared for display. About a week before the wedding, these items would be put on exhibition in a ceremony called the trousseau display. Important officials, members of the royal family, and selected dignitaries would tour through rooms filled with the bride's possessions, each item a testament to her status and wealth. The groom, for his part, had to assemble his own gifts for the bride and her household. These gifts flowed in both directions over days and weeks. The damat sent presents to the princess herself, to the Valide Sultan, to other members of the harem who had influence over the bride, even to the servants who attended her. The princess's household reciprocated with gifts carefully calibrated to honor the groom while maintaining her superior status. This exchange of gifts was itself a form of negotiation, establishing the terms of the relationship through material generosity. The actual wedding festivities could last 15 days or longer. Every day brought new feasts, new entertainments, new public displays. The Sultan or Grand Vizier would host elaborate banquets. Musicians performed. Poets composed verses celebrating the union. Acrobats and dancers entertained. Money would be distributed to the crowds that gathered to witness the spectacle. The princess remained at the center of all this attention, knowing that each day brought her closer to the night when the celebrations would end and she would be alone with her husband. On the wedding day itself, processions moved through the streets. The trousseau would be transported in a massive parade from the bride's current residence to the palace she would occupy as a married woman. Hundreds of people participated in moving and guarding these precious items. The groom traveled in his own procession, surrounded by officials and well-wishers. The princess, veiled and surrounded by her own attendants, made her way through ceremonies that blended Islamic legal requirements with Ottoman court protocol and older Turkish traditions. Through all of this, the princess remained a performer on a stage. She had to maintain composure. She had to appear appropriately modest yet regal. She had to accept congratulations and well-wishes from people she might barely know. And beneath the ceremony, the anticipation built. Soon the witnesses would withdraw. The attendants would step back. The door would close. And she would face the reality that all this elaborate preparation had been building toward. Ottoman princesses possessed one right that made their situation fundamentally different from virtually every other royal woman of their era. They could refuse to consummate their marriage. And they could refuse indefinitely, without any deadline, without any legal mechanism to force them into intimacy with their husbands. This right had no parallel in Christian Europe of the same period. European princesses, once married, had a legal obligation to consummate the marriage. Canon law and civil law both recognized consummation as necessary to make a marriage binding and complete. A European princess who refused her husband could find herself in serious legal jeopardy. Her marriage could be annulled, but this would disgrace her and her family. She could be sent to a convent or confined. Her refusal constituted a breach of the marriage contract itself. Ottoman Islamic law took a different view. Marriage required consent, and consent could be withdrawn regarding intimacy even after the legal marriage contract had been signed. A princess who chose to delay consummation was exercising a legitimate right, not violating an obligation. This created a situation where an Ottoman princess could be legally married for months or even years, while maintaining the physical autonomy of an unmarried woman. This right existed partly because of the princess's high rank, but also because of how Ottoman society understood marriage and consent. Islam's emphasis on mutual agreement in marriage extended to its physical aspects. A wife who did not wish to be intimate with her husband could not be forced. For an imperial princess, whose rank made her essentially inviolable except by the Sultan himself, this protection was absolute. In practice, this meant a princess could use her wedding night and the days and weeks that followed to evaluate her husband, to become comfortable with him gradually, to proceed at a pace she controlled. The damat, aware of his wife's superior rank and his dependence on her favor, had to be patient. He had to court her consent rather than assume it. This shifted the dynamic of the wedding night from obligation to negotiation, from submission to careful mutual approach. Yet this right, however protective it might seem, carried its own burdens. A princess who exercised it found herself in an ambiguous state. Her marriage existed legally, but not yet fully in reality. The pressure to produce children remained constant. The court watched. The empire expected heirs who would connect the princess's bloodline to her husband's loyal service. Every day that passed without consummation raised questions. Was the princess being unreasonably difficult? Was the marriage working? Would it need to be dissolved? Some marriages remained unconsummated for extended periods. Historical sources mention princesses who maintained separate households from their husbands and never established physical intimacy. These marriages could eventually be dissolved, often at the princess's initiative, and the princess could refuse to remarry. But an unconsummated marriage also meant an unfulfilled marriage, neither one thing nor another, leaving the princess in a perpetual state of transition. So why were Ottoman princesses afraid on their wedding nights? With all their power, all their rights, all their privileges, what created the trembling hands and racing hearts that historical sources hint at and human nature confirms? First and foremost, they faced the unknown. However sheltered a European princess might have been, however carefully guarded, she usually had some exposure to the wider world, to men, to the realities of life beyond immediate family. Ottoman princesses, raised in the harem's secluded environment, had almost none. Men did not casually enter the women's quarters. Brothers and fathers visited, but under strict protocol. The princess's world was overwhelmingly female, shaped by the Valide Sultan who controlled access and information. This meant an Ottoman princess arrived at her wedding night with profound ignorance about basic aspects of human intimacy. She might know in theory what marriage entailed. She might have received instruction from older women who had been married, but theory and practice are vastly different things. The physical reality of sharing a bed with a man she had perhaps seen only a handful of times, always at a distance, always under the watchful eyes of court officials, had to be terrifying. The age factor intensified this fear. A 13-year-old girl, however mature she might seem by the standards of her time, remained a child in many ways. The physical development necessary for comfortable intimacy might not have been complete. The emotional maturity to process what was happening might still be developing. Even at 17 or 18, considered quite old for a first marriage in Ottoman society, a princess faced something utterly outside her experience. Then there was the pressure of expectation. The empire needed these marriages to produce children. The dynasty required continuation. The princess's worth as a political asset depended partly on her ability to create the next generation of individuals who connected imperial blood to loyal service. An infertile princess, or one whose marriage produced no children, had failed in a fundamental duty. This pressure existed from the very beginning of the marriage. The wedding night was not just about intimacy. It was about dynasty, about legacy, about proving oneself capable of fulfilling the most basic biological function expected of women in that society. The husband himself represented another unknown. He might be kind, he might be patient, he might be willing to give his young wife time to adjust, or he might not. Despite his lower rank, despite his legal inability to force intimacy, a damat still had power in the immediate context of the wedding night. He was older, usually, more experienced, more confident. The princess, for all her imperial blood, might find herself completely out of her depth in this one crucial area where rank and status meant little against the raw physical reality of the situation. Finally, there was simple human fear of pain and vulnerability. Physical intimacy for the first time often involves discomfort, particularly for very young women whose bodies are not yet fully mature. Ottoman princesses knew this. Older women would have warned them. Medical treatises from the period discuss these matters with clinical detail. No amount of rank or privilege could eliminate the physical realities involved. And no amount of power over servants and subjects could prevent the vulnerability of being alone with another person in a context where defenses and dignity might not fully protect. After the wedding night, whether consummated or not, the Ottoman princess entered a phase of life that was again unique among royal women of the period. She did not become absorbed into her husband's household. She maintained her own establishment, her own sphere of influence, her own separate life that intersected with her husband's but never fully merged. The princess's palace became its own little empire. She had full authority over everyone within it. Her servants answered to her alone. Her finances were her own to manage. Her daily schedule, her social interactions, her charitable activities all remained under her control. The damat could visit, but only with permission. He had his own residence, his own duties, his own separate life in administration or military affairs. The marriage existed, but the two people in it maintained considerable independence. This arrangement allowed princesses to continue exercising political influence. They could receive visitors, correspond with officials, manage their vast estates, and engage in the patronage that marked them as imperial women. They commissioned mosques and public works. They intervened in legal disputes. They provided financial support for military campaigns. They acted as intermediaries between the sultan and various factions at court. Marriage did not end their political relevance. In many cases, it enhanced it, giving them an additional avenue of influence through their husband's position. The relationship between princess and damat could vary enormously. Some marriages developed genuine affection over time. Historical sources mention couples who became partners in both politics and life, who worked together to advance shared interests, who mourned each other's deaths. Other marriages remained purely transactional, two people connected by law and duty, but little else. Some marriages soured into open hostility, with the princess using her rights to divorce to end unions that had become intolerable. Perhaps the most remarkable right Ottoman princesses held was their ability to divorce their husbands with relative ease. While divorce in Ottoman society was more accessible than in Christian Europe generally, for imperial princesses it was even simpler. They could initiate divorce for various reasons, and their superior rank meant their petition would be heard sympathetically. The grounds for divorce were numerous. A princess could divorce if her husband mistreated her. She could divorce if he proved incompatible with her in temperament or habits. She could divorce if he took another wife or concubine, which was absolutely forbidden for a damat. She could divorce for political reasons if their continued marriage created problems for the dynasty. She could even divorce if the marriage remained unconsummated and she chose not to continue it. Divorce returned the princess to the Old Palace, a residence in Istanbul where royal women who were not currently part of the reigning sultan's immediate household lived. There she could refuse to remarry if she chose. Unlike European widows or divorcees who faced enormous pressure to remarry to secure their position, an Ottoman princess who had been married once and then divorced or widowed had the right to remain single for the rest of her life. Her income and status continued regardless. She remained an imperial princess with all the respect and deference that implied. Some princesses married multiple times, each marriage arranged for political reasons. Each ended when it no longer served its purpose or when the princess decided she had had enough. The historical record shows women who went through 3 or 4 marriages over a lifetime, each time maintaining their dignity and status, each time exercising their prerogative to either continue or end the union as they saw fit. This right to divorce existed as another check on damat behavior. A husband who forgot his wife's superior rank, who treated her disrespectfully, who failed to show proper deference, could find himself divorced and stripped of the connection to the imperial family that had made him powerful. The princess held this threat over the marriage from the very beginning. It was both a protection and a burden, another responsibility in the complex web of rights and duties that defined her life. To see how all these elements came together in a real life, we can look at Mihrimah Sultan, daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, and perhaps the most powerful Ottoman princess in history. Her story illuminates both the privileges and the pressures that shaped these women's experiences, including their wedding nights. Born in 1522, Mihrimah was the beloved only daughter of the Sultan and his extraordinary wife Hurrem, known to Europeans as Roxolana. She grew up in the palace during the empire's golden age, receiving an education that prepared her for enormous influence. She learned to read and write. She studied religious texts. She absorbed the complexities of court politics from her formidable mother. She was intelligent, capable, and expected to play a major role in the empire's affairs. At 17, Mihrimah married Rustem Pasha, a man of Croatian origin who had been taken as a boy through the Devshirme system, converted to Islam, and risen through merit to become one of the empire's most capable administrators. The marriage was arranged by her father with input from her mother. Mihrimah had known Rustem as a mentor to her brothers and an advisor to her father, but knowing someone in an official capacity and being married to them are very different things. The wedding in 1539 was magnificent even by Ottoman standards, lasting 15 days and celebrated alongside the circumcision ceremonies of her younger brothers. But for all the public splendor, Mihrimah faced her wedding night with the same fears any young woman would feel. She was 17, sheltered despite her education, about to be alone with a man more than twice her age who had built his career on calculated political moves and administrative efficiency. Historians believe Mihrimah developed a rheumatoid condition shortly after her marriage that caused her pain for the rest of her life. Some scholars speculate about psychological factors contributing to this illness, the stress of early marriage perhaps manifesting in physical symptoms. Whether that's accurate or not, we know Mihrimah's marriage produced 2 children but was not characterized by great warmth. Rustem was devoted to her in his way, but historical sources suggest a relationship based more on mutual political advantage than affection. Yet Mihrimah used her position brilliantly. She became her father's most trusted advisor after her mother's death. She managed the harem. She influenced military and diplomatic decisions. She commissioned architectural projects that still stand in Istanbul today. When her brother Selim became sultan, she effectively functioned as Valide Sultan, the empire's most powerful woman, even though she was technically his sister rather than his mother. Her marriage to Rustem gave her an additional lever of power, connecting her to the administrative apparatus of government through her husband's position as Grand Vizier. When Rustem died in 1561, Mihrimah chose not to remarry despite offers from powerful men. She had fulfilled her duty to the dynasty by producing children. She had used marriage to enhance her political position, but she had also experienced its limitations and burdens. She spent the last 17 years of her life as a widow, wielding influence without the complications of a husband, demonstrating that for all the power a marriage could provide, an Ottoman princess could be even more formidable on her own. The story of Ottoman princesses and their wedding nights reveals a profound contradiction about power and gender in one of history's most sophisticated empires. These women held extraordinary privilege. They commanded wealth that surpassed most European monarchs. They outranked their own husbands. They could refuse intimacy, initiate divorce, and maintain independent lives that few women anywhere in the world could achieve. Yet they were still afraid on their wedding nights. Afraid of the unknown, afraid of pain, afraid of failing to meet expectations, afraid of the vulnerability that comes with physical intimacy regardless of how much power you hold in every other sphere of life. Their fear reminds us that privilege does not eliminate fundamental human experiences. It simply changes the context in which those experiences occur. Ottoman princesses lived in a world that granted them power their European counterparts could barely imagine, while simultaneously expecting them to fulfill roles that stripped away that power in crucial moments. They navigated this contradiction with remarkable skill, using the rights they had to protect themselves while meeting the duties their position demanded. Their wedding nights marked the beginning of that navigation, the first real test of their ability to balance power and vulnerability, autonomy and obligation, fear and courage. Understanding their experience helps us see past simplistic narratives about women in Islamic societies or royal women generally. Ottoman princesses were neither helpless victims nor impossibly empowered figures. They were human beings navigating complex systems that granted and withheld power in complicated ways. Their fears on their wedding nights were real, so was the power they wielded before and after that night. Both truths existed together, and both deserve recognition. If you found this glimpse into Ottoman imperial life fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Codex of History for more deep dives into the hidden stories of the past. Drop a comment below telling us what aspect of Ottoman princess life surprised you most. And stay tuned for our next exploration of forgotten history.